So, pals, friends, acquaintances, and others, I have fallen down a rabbit hole. So, this all started from a BuzzFeed article, mind you, of craziest conspiracy theories that people actually believe. I found a conspiracy theory that I had to research, and I wanted to tell you about what I found. So, as I'm sure you've seen the title of this, there are people who believe that the Titanic didn't actually sink. This may just be like a personal fascination with the topic, which that I completely I can understand. So if you could imagine, Titanic came out, it's $19 on eBay. The hit film came out in 1997, mind you, I was 6 years old, and also that movie is 3.25 hours long. I assumed it was 4.5, but also I had the attention span of a 6-year-old, and any subsequent time I've ever seen it, it's just a really fucking long movie. A ripe 6-year-old Jana discovered that she had a crush on Leo DiCaprio, and now I think I'm more of a Billy Zane type of guy, not his personality in that movie, but in general. Do with that what you will. Okay, so Titanic came out in 1997. I, a 90s kid, very much loved that movie. I watched it into my adulthood, and I still like that movie. Now, mind you, my boyfriend Chris has never seen that movie, under the principle that he just refuses to watch it. For whatever reason, I don't know, he just doesn't like to have a good time, apparently. It is my life goal to get him to watch Titanic at least once. Let me catch you up to speed on what's going on, and then we can talk about the conspiracy theories, just in case you didn't know any of this beforehand. But, so at the time, Titanic was, its first voyage happened in 1912. At the time, the company, White Star Line, was releasing Olympic-class ocean liners, which were a trio of British-built ocean liners by Harland and Wolff, which was owned by White Star Line. They were the boats the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic. So the RMS Titanic, our gal, was in April of 1912 the largest ship in the world. Titanic and her sister, the RMS Olympic, were basically 1.5 times larger than the record-leading boats at the time. So they were fucking massive, Olympic-sized boats. They were the biggest, the baddest that anybody had ever seen. The Titanic's maiden voyage started shortly after noon on April 10th, 1912. She left Southampton, then bounced around the area for a little bit, picking up more passengers and cargo, and then shuttled on her merry way toward New York, United States. Her passenger list was non-discriminate. There were millionaires, which I'll get to later, on board. There were poor immigrants from other countries in Europe, and they were all basically coming to the United States to either emigrate or they were from here, so they were coming back and forth between. They were making their journey across the Atlantic Ocean. So by the time the Titanic left Queenstown, she had 892 crew members and 1,320 passengers on board. So this puts us at a grand total of about 2,212 individuals on the boat. The number gets a little dicey at the end, just because a lot of people either signed up with 2 names or 1 name, or there was some people who were on the boat who weren't ever like registered as being on the boat. So the end, the number's a little sketchy, but that's a rough estimate. So the staff of the Titanic, 892 people, as I stated earlier, were unfortunately not trained sailors, but they were instead engineers, firemen, stokers, or galley staff. It was captained by Edward Smith, who you'll hear about more later, I'm presuming. Really, weirdly enough, the guy who played him in the Titanic that I can't remember, sorry, Bernard Hill. That took longer than it needed to. Bernard Hill. He played Captain Edward John Smith on the movie, and he looks spitting image to the actual guy. He was this debonair looking captain guy. Cool. So the Titanic was captained by Edward Smith. He had over 40 years of experience as a boat person, and I think, I didn't write it down, but he had like 29 years as being a captain, so he was very experienced. He knew everything he needed to know. He was the most senior of the White Star Line's captains, and he was certainly capable of doing his job. Of the 892 staff, only 6 of them were watch officers, and 39 of them were able seamen, and of those few, the majority of those people had been picked up in Southampton and were never able to ride on the Titanic before they did their maiden voyage. Before it did its maiden voyage. So they basically were picked up, like, here you go, you're working on this boat, and then they shuttled them off for like, there you go, have at it. So the Titanic had a rough start even from before departure. On March 31st, 1912, if my math is right, there was a fire that started in one of the Titanic's coal bins, and it burned several days into the voyage, but was out by the time the boat sank. So a lot of people don't actually believe this had anything to do with anything. Apparently those are common because coal can spontaneously combust while in its holding, so apparently that was just a noted fact that happened, but it shouldn't have caused any damage to the boat. So the ice conditions, which are the key component here for obvious reasons, were caused by a mild winter, which had caused icebergs to shift from the west coast of Greenland, and they traveled south. Okay, so on April 14th, 1912, the ice conditions in the North Atlantic Ocean were the worst they'd been in April for over 50 years. So nobody expected them to be that bad. The employees and lookouts on the ship obviously could not have been aware of that. There was no way for them to know, but there were calls coming in to warn other boats about the ice. So at this time, I'm assuming icebergs were kind of common in that area of the Atlantic Ocean. There was a lot more than normal. So maybe they were just thinking, you know, these tiny little icebergs, you just either hit them or move around them and everything will be fine. So other boats were calling in to the Titanic to let them know that, like, hey, homie, there's fucking icebergs around, right? So at 9 a.m. on April 14th, the Rms Titanic says there are bergs, growlers, and field ice in the area, and growlers are like a plane of ice underneath the surface, so you can't really see it, but there's like ice underneath the surface. Obviously bergs are icebergs, and field ice is like smaller chunks of ice, from what I understand. Captain Smith received this message. We know that for a fact. At 1:42 p.m., the RMS Baltic relayed a message from the Greek ship Athena that said passing icebergs and large quantities of field ice are around. I answered the last part. Captain Smith also received that message. Captain Smith directed the boat onto a course further south from where they were. At 1:45, the German ship SS America was already in a position further south than where the Titanic was. So if the Titanic were like up here, the SS America was like down here. It reported that she had passed 2 large icebergs, but this message never made it to anyone on the Titanic, which the reasoning is still unclear. So I say that, but I'm pretty sure the message actually made it to like the radio people on the Titanic, but that message never made it past the radio room. So at 7:30 p.m., the SS Californian reports 3 large bergs, and at 9:40 p.m., the steamer Mesiba, quote, saw much heavy pack ice and a great number of large icebergs, also field ice. So these last 2 messages were received by the Titanic's control room. Radio operator Jack Phillips. So there was a whole mishap going on at the time. So apparently in the Newfoundlands, Cape Race, there had been a broken radio delay. So Jack Phillips was trying really hard to get all the people on the boat their messages from like land. It's possible that he didn't understand the importance, because obviously it was April in the Atlantic Ocean. He just assumed like, yeah, I get it, there's icebergs, you know. At 10:30 p.m., a final warning was received from a person on the Californian, which the Californian had stopped driving for the night because they had poor visibility and they were seeing a lot of icebergs. So they actually kind of parked for the night, and they sent a message to the Titanic, you know, be careful, there's fucking icebergs. And Phillips reportedly signaled back, shut up, I'm working on Cape Race. So even though the staff were, or at least should have been, aware of the ice in the area, the Titanic was still traveling at a booming 22 knots, which is about 25 miles per hour, which was only 2.3 miles per hour lower than her top speed. So nowadays, this is considered reckless. You would never drive through a field of icebergs going that fast, but at the time, it was completely standard. Ice wasn't treated as that much of a concern. Close calls were common. Ships had actually hit icebergs head on and were still able to complete their voyages. So around 11 p.m., we're back in 1914 now, back on the Titanic. Around 11 p.m., most of Titanic's passengers were asleep, and the ocean looked like glass, which is actually now a known warning sign of icebergs. The lookouts had no binoculars because apparently there had been a mix-up before the boat departed. I mean, they would have been useless anyways. There was no moon, there was only the lights from the ship, and I mean, it was a super dark night. It was in the middle of the ocean. At 11:39, the crow's nest spotted the iceberg. Shit happened. The Titanic was able to avoid hitting it head on, but basically hit it on the side that clipped it, which basically the boat scraped alongside this iceberg for a grueling 7 seconds, and By 1144, the Titanic's engines were stopped. So the damage done to the ship consisted of 6 narrow rips that covered a total of 12 to 13 square feet on the starboard side. So, here's the other issue though. The Titanic had a total of 20 lifeboats, 8 on either side of the ship and 4 collapsible boats with wooden bottoms and canvas sides. And on average, those boats could have fit 68-ish people in them, which could collectively accommodate 1,170 people. Just a little over half the people that I stated earlier that were on the boat. So there's problem number 1. The shortage of lifeboats was not because of lack of space or cost. The Titanic had been designed to accommodate 68 lifeboats, but they didn't want to muddy up the view of the ocean. So here, I wrote this whole thing out, but it doesn't need to be that technical. In an emergency, the lifeboats weren't supposed to get you to like the next country over, in like at least with something like the Titanic. The lifeboats were only supposed to help you get shuttled to a rescue boat. Basically, these boats were supposed to be built in a way that water would get into them so slowly that you'd have time. You could call the nearest by boat, they could come get you. It was common practice for people to have less lifeboats than what they needed back in the time. So people would under lifeboat because you're just supposed to be shuttled to the next ship over. Like that's all it was ever supposed to be. These lifeboats should have been able to make multiple trips back and forth. Theoretically, the Titanic sank so quickly in in about 2 hours that there were no boats that could even get close enough to them in that amount of time, especially with icebergs. The closest boat to them was the Californian, the one that had parked earlier, and they weren't turning on their boat to shuttle through the ice. So basically everybody that could have helped them was like, we'll get to you in the morning, just, you know, hold tight, like your boat's not going to sink that quickly. But I don't think anybody really realized the gravity of the situation that was occurring, because it should have taken a lot longer for the boat to sink. Here's the conspiracy theory time. Least likely conspiracy. A cursed mummy sank the Titanic. I refuse to even ponder the idea. Onward. Improbable. So I found, and I'll put it up here for you and I'll read it to you. You can have it. There's this whole conspiracy theory. In the novel Futility, an 1898 creation of Morgan Robertson, detailed the sinking of an unsinkable ship, the largest vessel afloat. This imaginary ship, named Titan, collided with the iceberg during April, resulting in a high loss of life because the ship carried too few lifeboats. 14 years later, with uncanny similarities, the real ship Titanic recreated what happened in the novel. The two ships had almost identical names. Both ships were designated unsinkable. Both were touted as the largest ships at sea. Both collided with icebergs in April. Both resulted in many deaths due to a shortage of lifeboats. Plus, both had strikingly similar floor plans and technical descriptions. Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidore Strauss, and the head of Macy's department stores, and John Jacob Astor, probably the wealthiest man in the world, were all killed when it sank. Those 3 men were the main opposition to the creation of the U.S. Fed. By April 1912, all opposition to the Federal Reserve was eliminated. In December of 1913, the Federal Reserve came into being in the United States, controlled by the Illuminati banksters. As I just stated, 3 very wealthy men were on the boat. Cool. They all perished in the shipwreck as well. And J.J. Astor was arguably one of the wealthiest men alive at the time. Guggenheim was a wealthy heir, and Strauss was a co-owner of Macy's. So they were all big kahunas. I can see that. So J.P. Morgan, supposedly set it up so his competitors would perish. He was known as the Napoleon of Wall Street, and apparently a big head honcho guy. He owned the business that owned White Star Line, and therefore he owned the Titanic. J.P. Morgan was at the Titanic's launching in 1911. He had his own personal suite with a promenade deck, which was all decked to the nines. It was super customized to him. It was like the whole kit and caboodle. He was booked to sail the Maiden Voyage, but like the day of, he copped out and didn't go. That's fodder for conspiracy theorists. That's that. Which, maybe a little more probable. I guess if you really wanted to get rid of your competitors, like money and power will do crazy things to crazy people. So, I mean, fucking, that's probably likely, I guess. But then the final conspiracy theory, and the only one that I think actually has any type of holding at all, is that the RMS Titanic and the RMS Olympic were switched. So this was in a book by Robin Gardner called Titanic, the Ship That Never Sank. So here are some interesting facts. The Titanic was started to be built on March 31st, 1909. 15 weeks after the Olympics hull was laid down. Both boats were made with identical styles, and they were made alongside each other. They're like basically identical. Like the Olympics profile was nearly identical to the Titanic, except for a couple like tiny details like the number of portholes on each side of the boat. So in Gardner's book, they state that few parts of either ship bore the name of the ship, other than lifeboats, which were easily removed, bell, compass, binnacle, and nameplates. So everything else was White Star standard issue and could be interchangeable between the two. And yeah, while all other White Star ships had their names engraved on the hulls, the Titanic had her name riveted on the top, so that was different. So on September 20th, 1911, here's where this conspiracy theory starts. The RMS Olympic left from Southampton and collided with another boat. Captain Smith, our guy from the Titanic, was also the captain of that boat. The Olympic was able to make it back to port without any significant injury or deaths, so that's where the conspiracy starts. Basically, what the conspiracy is that White Star Line realized that there was more damage done to the boat and it was more fucked up than they thought it was, and they switched them. So it was suggested that they were both in dry dock together in Belfast, and the registries on both boats were switched so that the Olympic, not the Titanic, set off in April 1912. My thought is that, you know, maybe, which I guess is what they're saying, is that Captain Smith was captaining this boat because he'd already captained the Olympic. He knew how to drive it, and he would be okay with being in on this conspiracy because come with me. Gardner's theory is that the Olympic was found to be at blame for the collision. So whatever it was, when their collision with the other boat, the Olympic was, it was their fault. White Star's insurers refused to pay out the claim. White Star's flagship would be out of action during the extensive repairs, and the Titanic's completion date, which was already behind on schedule due to the Olympic's return to the yard after her loss of a propeller blade, would have to be delayed. So all of this together would be a super huge financial loss for the company. The theory is that the badly damaged Olympic, which was more damaged than they thought it was going to be, which was going to be a huge money loss, was patched up, zhuzhed up, and released as the Titanic, and then the actual Titanic would quietly slip into service as the Olympic at a later time. Which could be said, it's standard practice that ships have to undergo sea trials, obviously, before they do their thing. The Olympics field trials lasted 2 complete days where they practiced the boat going full speed, and they tested everything out, everything was reviewed. The Titanic's trial wasn't even a day long, and they never took it at full speed, they only took it at half speed. Which the theory behind that is that they're like, kind of people were like half in on it, and they like knew what the RMS, like the White Star Line, was trying to do, and they knew that the Titanic was actually the Olympic that couldn't go as fast as it should because of the damage on it. You don't know. Maybe that's why they were rushing. I don't know. I'm trying to play devil's advocate here. Like, you know, if you really want to go down that rabbit hole, you can kind of maybe see how this one might be real. Right? Like, if you really want to like open your mind to the possibilities, I could see where they're going with this. I could see how this could be plausible. And that's the T says. I think it's plausible that, you know, maybe, shit, they were gonna lose a lot of money, and they did the old switcheroo on their boats so they wouldn't lose a whole bunch of money. Because that's why, so I forgot this part though, that's why a lot of people think that something was wrong with how quickly it sank. I forgot to tie this in. Here we go, I'm tying this in. A lot of people believe that it was the Olympic because of the fact that this boat literally, it shouldn't have sank. From what you think happened to it, and how indestructible this boat was supposed to be, you'd think it would be able to hit an iceberg and like be okay, at least not sink in 2 hours, you know? So that's why I think this conspiracy theory, another tidbit of it, why it came about, was the fact that this boat that was supposed to be unsinkable grazed a fucking iceberg and sank in less than 2 hours. Well, I keep saying in less than 2 hours. In less than 3 hours, this boat sank. So they think it was already just the shoddily repaired Olympic, and that's why it sank, was because it must have hit like the side of the boat, which I mean was already kind of damaged. I don't know, I didn't look into that part, so I'm just speculating, but if you're thinking like the boat's already kind of in disrepair and then you just patch it over real quick and send it on out because of deadlines or whatever you need to do, and then it just so happened that this fucking boat also just happened to hit another like another item, an iceberg, on its initial journey. So I mean, I guess I could see it. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying I guess I can see the thought train of how they got there. Now, do I personally believe in that? No, I don't think so. Although I like the idea, if I was gonna pick a conspiracy theory to go with, like that's the one I like the best. Like if I were gonna settle down on the Titanic conspiracy theory, if I had to choose, I'm picking that one because that one seems to have the most. No, I'm picking the mummy one. No, I'm just kidding. This one just has the most, like, I could see that. Do I think that's what really happened though? No. I think, you know, it's just a lot of bad things, I think, just kind of stacked up to make one really catastrophic thing, you know? There's a perfect storm of just chaos and, like, ill-trained people and just people and things happening at the wrong place at the wrong time. But I guess when you put it like that, when people who are about to lose a lot of money, I mean, I guess they're capable of anything. I mean, what are the odds? They might have just thought that they were gonna patch this name over on a boat and ship it out and it was gonna be okay and, like, nothing should have happened. But the fact that something did happen, like, it wasn't supposed to be a tragedy, and it just happened to be, you know? Let me know what you think. I'm curious. I want to know how many people believe in what theories, and if you believe in the mummy theory, I want to know. Tell me your resources, because I'd like to know these things. I couldn't find any good research besides the fact that, like, somebody said a mummy was stolen from a museum or something, and I was like, no, delete, I'm not reading that. So if you want, I'm releasing a new schedule for content to come up. I'll put it at the end of this if you'd like to check it out, and I'll put all my socials at the end as well. Thank you for joining me on this tumultuous time. I will see you all next time.